Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to be going over what I believe is the best dexterity focused build you can use. For my usual reasoning on why I think it's the best out there is mainly just from going through the most difficult bosses like an unstoppable train with ease. Additionally, I do believe this build would work fairly well in PvP fights because of its range, damage, and just how easy it is to use all around. Thus, it's not only highly effective but also very versatile in every given situation I've came across. But anyways, let's actually dive into the build now, and we'll start off with the best weapons to use. With our main hand, we're going to be using the Bolt of Grandsax. It's a spear-styled weapon, so it's going to have a lot of reach. In fact, it actually has the second longest range out of all of the others. Furthermore, it's one of the hardest hitting spears you can get that comes with a decently handy passive. Whenever we fight dragons, we do an additional 20% increased damage to them and 10% more to ancient dragons. Now I'm saying it's decently handy because dragons aren't a very common enemy in the game, but when you do go up against one, especially the ancient dragon types, they are pretty strong, so this passive buff will definitely help out in those situations. Another thing we can take a look at is the type of damage this weapon does. Now since it's split between physical and lightning, we can increase the lightning part of it by quite a bit with the help of a few items, one of them being the Lightning Scorpion Charm. It's going to increase all lightning attacks by an extra 12% for the exchange of 10% reduced physical damage negation. This isn't too bad because we can always throw on some heavier armor to counteract the negative effects of the talisman. Once more, what's really nice about the talisman is it applies to everything that deals lightning damage. So this includes our basic attacks, bolts, arrows, spells, and more importantly, the Ash of War on our weapon, Ancient Lightning Spear. Lots of people know this weapon mainly for its extremely powerful attack. Your character conjures up a red lightning bolt before whipping it at ridiculous speeds with tons of range and high amounts of damage. It's definitely one of the best Ashes of War to use in so many given situations. Now by itself, it's phenomenal, but we have the option to make it better, so why wouldn't we? Going forward, this Ash of War has a special feature to it. You can charge it up, which takes a longer time to cast, but it does more damage and travels further. Or you can let it rip a little bit sooner in exchange for a faster casting speed, yet you get less range and damage out of doing so. Because it's got that feature to be charged up, we can also toss on Godfrey's Icon to add an extra 15% damage boost to any spells or skills that have this feature. Lastly, I'll show you where you can find all of these. With the Bolt of Grandsax, this is the only mandatory late game item that you'll really want. So to get this, you'll have to reach Lionel Royal Capital and make sure not to kill Malekith the Black Blade beforehand, because if you do, it does lock you out of getting this weapon entirely. Then for the Lightning Scorpion Charm, you'll have to loot it from the Wyndham Catacombs in the Mount Gelmer area. Afterwards, you can grab Godfrey's Icon after beating a version of him who can be found in the Golden Lineage Everjail. All in all, I think that covers about everything for this spear. An absolute godlike Ash of War on it, while having some decent basic attack damage. Personally, I'm not a fan of decent damage, so I did add something to help out, cause you're not just going to be using the Ash of War on every basic to strong enemy in the game. So since it's a spear, it only makes sense to use another spear in our offhand so we can power stance our attacks for the most damage. Now the best spear we can use in our offhand is going to be the Cross Naginata. If you're tired of seeing this weapon over and over again, you can grab whatever other spear you want. It's not going to make a massive difference. The reason I oftentimes go with the Cross Naginata is just because it's the hardest hitting basic spear with majority of the affinities you place on it, while being an easy early game item to get. Moving forward, we are going to be using the Lightning Affinity on it since it does scale with the Dexterity stat, and we have a few ways of increasing that type of damage. So for the Ash of War, this is where it becomes a lot more customizable because you're not going to be using it that much when you're just playing Elden Ring solo, because the Bolt of Grandsax is just insanely good. This is where the PvP aspect of this build comes into play, because the Bolt of Grandsax is amazing, but if you're fighting another player that's in front of you, it's not too hard to dodge it. In other words, when you're PvPing, use the Cross Naginata in your main hand and the Bolt in your offhand so you have access to another Ash of War that'll be way more useful in those close range fights. Now the best ones for this is either Giant Hunt which is really good for roll catching your opponents, just sending them flying into the air, Sword Dance for closing the gap and tricking your opponents with its 2-part attack that is just really effective all around. And lastly, Piercing Fang, which is phenomenal, because the move is very quick and instant, oftentimes becoming hard to judge when it's coming at you, and having a ton of range as well. On top of that, all of these Ashes of War scale with dexterity, or both dexterity and strength, so the damage is still going to be really good. However, it can and will be boosted some more with the help of the Shard of Alexander. Now this is going to add another 15% increased damage to all of our Ash of War attacks, Bolt of Grand Sax included, so that just gets even more powerful because there's 3 talismans helping it out now. Regardless of that, back to using this build in PvE. So when we are power stancing the spears, you do so much damage you won't feel like you need to use the Ash of War on even the tougher enemies in the game. In reality, I don't actually use the Ancient Lightning Spear Ash of War that often, except for in boss fights because it really shines in those battles, versus when you're just running around in the game and the spears are capable of 2 to 3 shotting most enemies, it just ends up being much quicker that way for getting through areas. Moreover, I'm going to show you all where you can find all of these. With the Cross Naginata, you can loot it from the Gale Tunnel right in between Caelid and Limgrave, a nice early game item that is extremely good for most builds. Afterwards, you can grab one of the 3 Ashes of War for the spear, because you don't need all 3 of them for this build, one will be more than enough, but I'll still show you all of their locations. So the earliest one we can get is Piercing Fang, and this can be acquired by either finishing the Bloody Finger Hunter Yura's questline, or by just flat out killing him and taking it off his katana. Then you can go grab Sword Dance by killing a Teardrop Scarab that can be found near the Minor Erd Tree in southwest Liurnia. Now the most difficult one to get is Giant Hunt, just because you have to kill a Knight's Cavalry boss in the northern part of Liurnia, and that's more of a mid-game boss fight with its difficulty. By all means go ahead and try it out, but do expect it to be a bit challenging if you don't have a mid to late game character leveled up. Then lastly, the Shard of Alexander is given to you after completing the Iron Fist Alexander questline. Highly recommend getting this talisman. I've used it in countless amounts of builds. It's something you'll almost always be using. Going back to our weapons, I did add a bonus one that works really well with spears and gives you a different type of playstyle while being an easy early game item to get, the Brass Shield. Now it's the best medium shield, having 100% physical damage reduction, so we don't lose any health at all when blocking hits, and it's got the highest guard boost of 69, which just means we lose less stamina when we do block those hits. I swear they buffed shields because I don't remember losing such little stamina before when absorbing attacks. But anyhow, the reason it works really well with spears is mainly because you can poke at enemies while blocking at the same time. So this just gives us more safety when we're taking out weaker opponents to avoid any chipping in our health bar. However, when we are dealing with bosses, you're mainly going to be using the shield to block big hits, get some distance, and chuck lightning bolts, since those are going to be doing more damage than just normally poking at him. Now because bosses throw out much stronger attacks that would consume way more stamina to block, this is where the Ash of War comes into play. For that, we're going to be using Barricade. Your character reinforces his shield, causing him to lose less stamina when blocking, and usually it lasts long enough to stop any kind of major attacks that would kill or heavily cripple our character during those fights. So very simple. Poke at regular enemies from behind the shield, then with bosses, use Barricade to absorb any hits, get some distance, and launch those lightning bolts. A nice bonus to the shield is if you don't want to use Barricade or any Ash of War for the matter of it, it comes with no skill, which will allow you to use the Ash of War of your weapon in your main hand instead. As usual, I'll show you guys where you can find both of these. For the Brass Shield, you'll have to farm it off of the Godric soldiers who can be found at the Gatefront Ruins. Very easy enemies to kill and lots of them, so it won't take too long. With the Ash of War Barricade, just like the Ash of War Giants Hunt, you'll have to defeat a Knight's Cavalry at the Weeping Peninsula, another fight you'll want to have at a mid-game leveled character. So that covers everything for the weapons. Now let's move on to ways to increase their damage, with one of them being the Flask of Wondrous Physic. The best tiers to use with this are the Lightning Shrouding tier, which is going to add an extra 20% increased damage to our lightning attacks, which is pretty much around half of our damage. Then for the second one, I'm going with the green spill crystal tier, which increases our maximum stamina by 15%, and both of these tiers last for 3 minutes each. The green spill tier is actually pretty big for this build, because the ancient lightning spear Ash of War consumes a lot of stamina when using it, usually running out of that there before mana. So now we can chain cast it with no worries. Additionally, it will help out with the shield as well, allowing us to block more hits before being guard broken. Definitely a good tier for this build. Lastly, because this is a dexterity focused build, we don't have a secondary stat to put points into to increase our damage, so I ended up putting some into Faith so we can cast the spell Golden Vow. Now this is going to give us a 15% damage increase and 10% damage negation bonus for 80 seconds. It's honestly a really great spell all around. I've used it in countless amounts of builds, just like the Shard of Alexander. Another bonus to this is you don't have to use any kind of special Sacred Seal or even level it up at all. A level 1 seal will do the exact same thing as a maxed out one. A nice damage and protection buff that I usually use right before a boss fight or any difficult areas really. And again, for where to find all of these, the Lightning tier can be rewarded after defeating an Erdtree Avatar boss who can be found northeast of Liurnia of the Lakes. With the green spill, this one's much easier, not requiring you to kill anything but to just run up to an altar next to the minor Erdtree in Mistwood. The Spike Crack tier is also going to be beside it, which isn't used in this build, but it doesn't hurt to grab it as well. Then for the spell Golden Vow, you can loot it from the Corpse Stench Shack in the Mount Gelmer area. Like I said before, there's no special Sacred Seal to use, so I'd recommend buying the Finger Seal, which is the easiest one to get. All you have to do is just buy it from the Twin Maiden Husks, who can be found at the Round Table. Now before I go over the minimum stats required, let's take a better look at the armor we can use. So for the headpiece, I'm going with the Navy Hood, which increases our mind stat by 1 level. Nothing huge, but this will give us the perfect amount of mana to cast Golden Vow and Ancient Lightning Spear 4 times before completely running out. Obviously, you can wear something else and throw an extra point into mine to achieve that, except I wanted to keep this build at level 150 while having the most damage possible. It's not a big issue, just something worth mentioning is all. With the chest piece, I'm going with the Black Knife armor, which silences all of our running, jumping, and rolling, making it so much easier to sneak up behind people and burst them down with the dual-wielded spears. In closing, the gloves and boots aren't anything special. I mainly just went with the Radon set for some heavier armor to make up for the light helmet and medium chest piece since they don't offer the most protection together. So the most important pieces are the helmet and the chest piece. As usual, I'll show you where you can find both of these. With the Navy Hood, you'll find it at the East Windmill pasture in the Atlas Plateau. It'll be in a pile of burning corpses surrounded by a bunch of dancing women. Then for the Black Knife armor, you'll have to reach Ordina Liturgical Town in the Consecrated Grounds, to where it'll be laying on a corpse under an archway. Now these aren't crazy OP items, so don't feel like you absolutely have to get them. Any other armor would do just fine with this setup. Moving forward, the last thing we have to cover for this build are the minimum stats required. For this, you'll need at least 20 strength and 40 dex to use all of the weapons effectively. Afterwards, I'd recommend putting 25 points into Faith to cast Golden Vow for the damage and protection buff, then some into Endurance so you can wear some heavier armor. My last talisman actually helps out with this by quite a bit, Radagon's Soar Seal. This increases our vigor, endurance, strength, and dexterity by 5 levels, so this talisman alone saves us 20 whole levels, which is very huge. But as good things come, it does have a negative effect to it, making us take 15% increased damage. In spite of that, the damage negation buff we get from the spell Golden Vow cancels this out pretty nicely, so you won't really feel that increased damage during those boss fights or tough areas. With this talisman's location, you can pick it up in Caelid at Fort Ferrith, which is found on a corpse by dropping down the opening from the roof and exploring the wooden walkways. Another fairly easy item to get that doesn't require you to kill anything, but it would make it much easier though. So that's about everything for this video. Before I end it off, I do want to give a big thanks to the members of my channel for supporting me on my videos and the future ones to come. Thanks for watching, and I hope I see you all in the next one.